Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
bringing you this week's Living Ascension. Yeah. There's been so many layers. This past week has been very intense energetically.
Right.
Collectively and individually for most. And whenever I say intense, I don't necessarily mean it in a bad way, but it could feel bad at the time. It could just feel really heavy and
Full.
Yeah. So early last week, we had a very heavy couple of days, right? So whatever you want to attribute to, right? You want to attribute it to the elections in the United States. You want to attribute it to the eclipse, full moon, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter because it was a collective energy that we were holding that we were just reflecting back to ourselves via the eclipse, via the elections and whatever. And everybody's got their version of something from last week, pretty much. So we actually had an entirely different topic that we can't even remember what it was to talk about today and how to do with all that. But apparently that's not relevant because that sort of got erased from our minds.
Right. Or this is a better way in.
Right.
And we'll let that unfold as we talk.
Right. Because this topic, I have an entire page of notes from Friday, which is that an off the cuff discussion. But the thing is, I hear a lot especially in this, actually not necessarily just in the spiritual context, but community. I hear a lot of people say today, I've never quite felt like I fit in. Right. And we've talked about like how we put so much energy toward fitting in. And I can't even remember what week that was in the past month or two, because I know we've done it. That we have so many things that tell us that we're supposed to be this way. Oh, it was when we were talking about the shadow, right? So it was, like the things that we're told we're supposed to be to make us a good person, right? Or to make us fit in, because that's this compulsion, and it's this egoic masculine, the masculine energies, right? The separation-based energies that say, I feel like I'm in lack of wholeness, so I must always search for fitting in to that wholeness, because I always feel like I'm not it.
It's that measure that we keep,
right?
That we keep comparing ourselves to in everything we do, everything we think, the results of what we do. It's that unconscious. Well, did that quite meet my expectations, or did that? Now, do I feel like that good person? Now, do I feel like I'm fitting in? I'm one of the crowd. I belong.
Right. And I hear more and more these days. I hear people say, "I've just never felt like I've quite belonged."
Right.
And so we look at that, though, interestingly, as a negative, right? Because it's separation based, and exclusionary based, and whatever. And the funny part is, I've always had this friction inside of me, right? But usually the one part of me is like, just do what you want to do, right? Be yourself. And then there's the other part, the ego part, that's like, oh, no, but you've got to do this, because then you've got to be liked, and you've got to have people, like you, and even in whatever context. And as
what will people think?
Right. What will people think? And as I've grown older, that's become less and less of a measuring stick for me. As I've become more aware and been more focused and committed in my own consciousness, I've always been conscious of that pull, but we also have this really unconscious part of it that we were talking about last week, the unconscious stuff. What were we talking about last week?
I think that was the shadow as well.
Was it? Oh, right. The unconscious pull of, oh, I'm going to do this so that then I fit into humanity, right? So here are some things that you might not think about that makes you, that we have as these running in the background kind of programs, right? So like this, I have to be sick when everybody else is sick because that makes me human.
Right.
And if I don't, or I have to talk I have to talk about all the negative things in my life and what sucks in my life, because if I don't, I'm not going to fit in.
And people will not want to be around me,
Right.
because they'll be, I don't want to use the word jealous, but they'll be resentful
Right.
because I represent something they're not.
Right. And you can do that with anything. You can do that with money, right? I don't want to have too much money. There's an unconscious belief. I don't want to have too much money, because then people won't want to just hang out with me for me.
Right.
So these are the things that we have. And so we have these underlying programs that are running on, behind the scenes, that are saying, well, what are you doing to fit in? Here's the thing. No matter what you do, you're never going to fit in with everybody, because everybody's an individual, right? We pretend. And so then what you and I started talking about, and I think this was in the peripheral to this, but it wasn't actually this topic, but it had to do with, things like religion, right? And politics and stuff like that.
Right.
People tend to follow what they've been led to believe, right? So parents have taught their kids, this is what you should do. You should go to church. You should vote this way. You should believe this. This is how people should be treated, or this is what should happen. And like a majority of the time, what you've been brought up with is what you then perpetuate.
Or you feel comfortable with.
Right. Because it's comfortable.
Right. Right. Absolutely. It's I think in the book, Four Agreements, he talks about it as domestication, where you become trained and conditioned to believe a certain way. So then that translates and filters into your behavior.
Mhm.
And you feel that if I can just meet these requirements, then I'll be happy, or then I'll feel loved, or then I will feel like I belong, or I'll feel a sense of community, or
Mhm.
a sense of security. And
Mhm.
and who's not looking for that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's that search externally for those things.
Yes.
And
Yes.
but underneath, you've still got that undercurrent of what you truly believe unconsciously, and your passions.
Yeah.
And that's where we started talking about how, we fit in a little bit here, and we fit in a little bit here, and we fit in a little bit here. But if we focus only on what our passions are, then we come to a whole different place with all of it.
Right. Right. Because so what happens often is you say, okay, I have to find the common thread, right? This is and we don't even think this consciously, right? I have to find
Right.
the common thread. I mean, when we meet somebody, you got to find something you have in common, to continue the conversation, right?
Right.
And so it can be an interest. It can be something you're against, something you're angry about, right? Something you're like, we could say passionate about, but you could just say something you're angry about, something you have,
Right.
Sadness about, right? So a lot of times we connect.
Yeah, the commonality.
Right, whatever that is.
Where do you intersect with this person?
Right, where do you intersect with that person? And sometimes what happens is then the unconscious program of I must fit in and figure out a way to fit in is I will now just hang out with this person or these people who have this piece in common with me. And I'll force myself into the box because of whatever else that they provide, because then I feel like I fit in.
Right. I will meet these people under these terms.
Right.
And it becomes this like little agreement.
Right. Right. And a lot of times we then cut it off, right? Because then the ego gets involved and goes, oh no, well, this is my clique or my group, or these are my people. But then you start sacrificing. So then what you start doing under the surface, you start sacrificing parts of yourself, because you're like, oh, well, to be a part of this group, I have to be this way, or I can't do this, or I have to limit this, or I can't be with this kind of person to be in this group. And this is
it's like you step into a mold almost, and you allow it to limit you. You may find that you flow into new areas, but you also limit in other areas. And those areas that you might flow into may not be something that you're passionate about or that are congruent with who you are.
Or you just get into this habit of saying something to fit into the rest of whatever that purview is, that you never stop to listen to your heart about it and say, has that changed? Because it might have been true at one point.
Right.
That's the other thing. Like we talk about friendships and relationships of all kinds, jobs and, careers and hobbies. And we're like, okay, well, I've done this since the beginning. So I've just got to continue doing this. But we don't stop and ask ourselves, well, why am I doing this? Like we get into that habit of, well, this is how I fit into society. Well, now I've created a comfort zone. Like this is what I look like. This is the life I've created. This is what I present to the world. So this is much more comfortable because I've already broken that path, right? Even if it's not 100% happy, even if it's not 100%, like what I, makes me okay.
And then we get into that whole thing that we talked about with change, not wanting change.
Right.
You allow that comfort to hold you in that space so that you're resistant to the change that would potentially let you outgrow that group or
right.
expand beyond those beliefs, those limiting factors, rules, whatever you want to call them.
And a lot of times what we do then is we start to and this all taps into shadow work. This all taps into the shadow stuff, because then the shadow hides behind all of this, right? Because then we start to judge people based on what their choices are. We start to judge because they're not fitting in with my expectation of this,
right?
Lovability or fitting in or the importance of that. And then think about that. I mean, it's like, oh, well, just don't mind her. Don't mind her. She's, it's funny. I'll never forget. I have this one aunt, and she is like the eccentric in the family, like very, always goes her own way, always goes, I mean, she's always just sort of been off on her own, and she's just like, people describe her as flitty or, like in a, not in a non-loving way, but that's just how, like, whatever she's. And I'll never forget one time she said something to me or posted something on Facebook about like being the eccentric, about me being the eccentric one in the family. And I just laughed. And I was like, well, I guess I should thank her.
That's a compliment, right?
That's a compliment, right? But, like, when we talk about that in family, you have to fit in, you have to do this certain thing.
Right. Or there's the black sheep of the family.
Right.
The one that just doesn't follow the rules, the one that's always causing trouble, the one that's always rocking the boat.
Right. And the point is with this is that we put so much often, we get to place, and it's funny because I actually went through an exercise in this weekend where I inadvertently threw dynamite into a haystack in a community that I belong to, because I was basically just saying, hey, don't label. Stop labeling. And, because people are doing these things because they think they're supposed to, because this is a label that they're thinking is supposed to be the ultimate, outcome of something. And oh my goodness, and I said it in a diplomatic way, but it just exploded in that community. And I was like, oh, well, that wasn't my intention. It was just, hey, might want to just keep this in mind. And I said it in a very nice way, but then it was like, oh, defensive, because then it was like, no, I want to tell you why. I want to tell you why I do this way, or then denial is the other end of that. But, the point is we are in labeling, right? Is labeling, I'm good. I'm a good person. I am this kind of person. I'm not that kind of person. This is all labeling. It's something I tell, and I'm probably going to piss off somebody here by saying this, but, it's like I tell my kids, because the millennial and the Z generation are all like, there's very LGBT and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
LGBTQZ or whatever, and there's a new label like every other week. And I tell them, you know what? Stop labeling, because you're creating new labels to fight the old labels instead of saying no labels.
Right. Right.
I'm like, here's the thing. I can love who I love. I can be who I am. I can choose to be however I want to be. No labels. Like, because then
Right.
when you start putting yourself in a label, then you start to, what we were talking about, I think last week, fight to stay in a comfort zone, right? And you create stuff, then that might not serve you, and you're not always rolling forward and evolving and
Right.
allowing yourself, right?
Well, and what I picture when you're talking about this is we always talk about the pendulum. Well, if the pendulum's all the way to the left and you want it in the center, people feel that it has to go all the way to the right before it'll ever come back to the center. Well,
Right.
if we believe that, then that's a perfect example of, well, there are these labels, so I'm going to fight for these labels when I really just want no labels.
Right. And when we get to the place of, like, the key is what you started touching on a couple minutes ago, is we're all stuck, and labels are all things. They're all things, right? When we start to connect to who we are without the labels, without the things, right? And if we go back to, I don't know, sometime in the past month, when we talked about the authentic resonance, right?
Yes.
And we go back to finding what our authentic resonance is without the label, saying, and I can be this today, I can be this tomorrow. Then we start to connect things through passion and through love, right? And then we just start seeing the commonality and the thread of connection with everyone and everything around us. And then we stop fighting. No, I'm right and you're wrong. No, this label is right and you're wrong. And this sort of backs into part of something we were talking about that I think was part of the topic we started with, but because we were talking about, like, with the politics, and it's like, it's nuts because nobody listens to anybody anymore. Nobody listens to anybody.
And
Because
it used to be, well, the squeaky wheel gets the attention, but everyone's a squeaky wheel.
Mhm.
And you've got a room full of squeaks and nobody's listening and nobody has a
because
can
it's
of
so
oil.
loud, we have to hold our ears, right?
Right. Right. And I personally started feeling very alone. And because I felt like, well, no one believes as I believe. And it's like, that's looking at the belief through the labels.
Right.
Whereas if you start looking at, the beliefs of, I believe wholeheartedly in who I am and what I am.
Right.
And coming back to that level without the layers or the labels, it just doesn't matter.
Right.
Doesn't matter what your neighbor thinks. It doesn't matter what your community voted for or against. It just doesn't matter. It's staying in that place of, I fit in because I'm here.
Right. Because I'm me. Just
Right.
because I'm me. Right.
Exactly. And
I'm here to be me.
here.
Right. I'm here to be me in the unique color or note. We talk about the symphony, right? And the unique note that I am, to be a part of the symphony. So my intrinsic, my intrinsic presence just means that I fit in as the symphony, right? So, like, and why would I not be everything that I could be, right? And limit myself to try to fit into somebody else's note, right? Or judge them for being a different note than me, or judge me for being a different note than them. That's the most challenging part that we have, because I started getting pulled into that myself last week.
Right.
And it was funny because the thing that I posted in the community that I'm referring to was my effort at, like, pulling that out of myself, right? But of course, then I triggered everybody on me by doing that. Because I brought up some, unconscious biases of the others. But yeah, that's the whole thing is, we have so many layers to this, and we have, like, oh, well, we look to each other, and this is where, honestly, it's getting to a point where I just want to get off of social media for a while, because everybody just does based on, oh, well, if you want to be like me, then do this. Well, that's
right.
You see that all the time.
Right.
If you want to be like me, then do this. If you want to, or for me to approve of you, you have to agree with me. So therefore, like, and otherwise you're an idiot. I mean, and that's where people have gotten to on social media and in the news, right? Basically.
Right.
And so like the thing for us to look at, we go back to marketing and consumerism and commercials that tell you that, oh, well, you're only a cool person if you own this, Tesla or this Lincoln Continental, like, right? Because you got slick, what's his face? Matthew McConaughey driving the Lincoln.
Right.
So therefore, if
Right.
you want to be cool like Matthew McConaughey, then you need to drive a Lincoln. That's what we do. I did
Right.
market, that was my profession for years. That's what you do. It's all, you want to call it's all psychology, right?
Right. Well, and I mean, it's even gotten more refined for the younger. It's like, oh, well, I saw this on TikTok, so it's got to be something that's worthy.
Right.
And products, if it goes viral on TikTok, man, it's got to be good. It's
Right.
got to be good. And it sells out, and it's crazy if that's all the marketing that they do. But it's the same peer pressure. It's the same.
Yeah, same thing, different
Do
package.
this.
Yeah. To fit in.
Right.
And so it continues on what we talked about last week. I think it was last week, on how much energy we put into fit, like how much energy. What did we talk about last week? I feel like this is what we talked about part of it last week.
Last week, well, no. Was it resisting change?
Maybe.
Right.
I'd have to go look at my notes. So yes, resisting change. Yep. See, I just opened right to my notes. That was good. Yeah. So the point in talking about this is we look at not fitting in as a bad thing, but like in general, the ego looks at not fitting in as a bad thing. But the point that I was thinking about this and I talked to you when we were talking originally is really, it's not a bad thing. It's just a matter of shifting where we connect from.
Right. And if you look at it in terms of what's traditionally accepted is, if your goal is to fit in, you're connecting only at the ego level.
Right.
Only at the ego level, and that's all you're concerned with in satisfying.
Right. Because, it's funny, how many times have you had friends or acquaintances, really good acquaintances that you hung out with while you both had something in common? You both did something, like you did a sport or a hobby together, right? Well, then one of you stopped doing the hobby, and then how quickly did it like fade away that you didn't hang out anymore because you didn't have that commonality, right? Versus who have you just been connected with, even if you have a lot of different things that don't, that aren't the same, but you have the same energy and emotions and feelings about something. I mean, you might have some similarities, but you don't have to do the same thing. That's a much different kind of connection.
It is.
I mean, our commonality is we're all part of the wholeness. We're all the same at the end of the day.
Right. Well, I mean, you can even take that like to a family level. How many times have you heard about families that once the parents die, that the siblings kind of just drift apart because what their commonality was the parents.
Right.
So that's another example of connecting at a different place.
That happened in my family as the elders in the family passed away.
Right.
And then that glue that was pulling everybody together just sort of stopped. Right. So it was, well, then you just have to choose, do I want to continue this or not?
Right.
Or you just get to a
and
point
and it allows the connection to be at a more authentic level.
Yes. Right.
Versus externally imposed.
Right.
Which I think, as you said before, gets you more on the path to embodying or simply recognizing that authentic resonance, which is there. The question is, how close do you associate with it?
Yeah. It's funny because, like I said, there's there's the whole, yeah, like my kids' generations and whatever behind them. There's all this like, and I understand it. There's all this anger and uprising and whatever, which is great, right? Except what happens with this labeling, right, and this fitting into one thing or another is that then if you say I'm this and I'm not this and you're that, then it prevents people from connecting. It like that's where the ego pulls up brick walls. This is where we've gotten stuck collectively, politically in this world, period. Right? You either stand for this or not for this. And you know what? And yes, it's always been like, it's always like argumentative and debates and stuff like that. But at least the different sides used to be able to work together. That just doesn't
Right.
happen
And there
anymore.
used to be a common ground at some point.
Mhm.
And it feels like now that the purpose or the point is to completely separate so that there is no common ground.
Right. Right. And to say, no, I just want to annihilate you so that you'll go
Right.
away.
Right. And that's become the common ground where they're each interested in eliminating the other.
Instead of what can we do together that will then bring everyone, together for a common cause. We've sort of lost the ability to do that. So the key is for us to remember how to do that within ourselves. Right.
Right.
So, one time my kids have asked me, well, like, because there are some friends that I've had for a long time or whatever, and that we don't necessarily see eye to eye on some things.
Right.
Right. And my kids have asked me as adults, they're like, well, how do you navigate that? Like, how can you be friends with somebody who has that, much of a different perspective? And I'm like, well, because we have a lot of things in common from here. Right. And when we can connect from here, those things are just things. And yeah, we might agree to disagree. That's where you can just agree to disagree. Right.
Right. It doesn't mean I need to annihilate you because you threaten my beliefs.
Right. Or I don't need to call you a jerk or an idiot or whatever because you have different beliefs than I do. I can just simply say, okay, well, we're just going to agree to disagree and we can move on. I have, like you were talking about, like the whole like feeling alone or whatever. It's like, well, I would say a majority of the people in my neighborhood are very different in terms of political stance than we are. And yet I get along fine with my neighbors.
Right. Right.
We find common ground. And so that's the key. And like I've been looking at within myself. So I've almost gone to another extreme, and I'm trying to figure out where that balance is. Like, and this is something that I was thinking about is, so when do you get to a place where, like, 'cause, like I've gotten in the habit over the years is that if I don't agree, I just don't argue. I just let it sit. Right.
Right.
And then I'm like, well, if we all did that, then we would never have the conversation. Right.
Right. It just maintains that separation in my mind.
Right. So then what I've been asking is, well, how do I do that differently without it?
Right.
Because I don't want to debate like I used to be a debater. I used to be the other extreme. I would debate everything that didn't agree with, where my perspective was. And
Right.
now I'm just like, well, no, you're allowed to have, I honor everybody's, perspective.
And in
Right.
return, I expect my perspective to be honored.
Right. Right. And that's where I guess I don't assert, because I'll just move on, change the
Right.
subject, whatever.
Well, and it's that reminds me of that phrase, if you keep doing the same thing over and over but expect different results, that's the definition of crazy. And it's like, if you continually expect things to change but yet you keep quiet and you don't express your opinions, how can you expect people to understand that you feel differently about something?
Right. Well, that's sort of what I did this weekend, and that's sort of our community. So
Well, and it's a two-sided thing. I know that you said something to me, expressing a struggle that you were having, and it made me look at certain behaviors that I had towards you, and I changed my behavior towards you, whether it's like, you know, respecting your time more, or, you know, if I ask you the same thing, like, how do you do something 5 different times? It's like disrespecting you by not just freaking writing it down. And it makes a difference in how you interact with other people when
right.
they've expressed something that makes you think twice about how you've treated them. And unless you say that,
And the
it might
challenge,
never change.
that's true. But the challenge with that is, right, is connecting with people who are conscious, self-aware as
Right.
well, right? Because
Absolutely.
it doesn't work with somebody who's not self-aware.
Well, and at the same time, it's like you also, and I hate to use the word risk, but it's, you have to factor in that number one, they might not at all even hear what you have to say. And
Right.
it might go right over their head or under their feet. They might just not get it. Or
Right.
two, it might offend them.
Right.
And they may never speak to you again.
Right. Which I've had that happen too.
So, but it's at that
right. And the
point,
context. So here's the thing. There's a and this is some of the stuff that we talk about, like in self-response, in our self-responsibility course, right?
right.
In the Wonderland. See, we got it in.
Right.
Wonderland.site. Go see our Wonderland program, the 7 key essences there that'll get you down into like quite a bit of consciousness. But the self-responsibility thing, you know, we have a whole course on self-responsibility, and people can say, well, what can you do? But there is so much about self-responsibility. When I come to the table in a conversation, this sort of changes our direction a little bit, but not a lot. When I come, because this is important when we start looking at how to connect differently, right?
Right.
So my commitment to myself, I will say this here, I will say this at any point, anybody who really knows me knows this about me, is I commit to my self-responsibility in any given situation. So if I trigger somebody, or if somebody triggers me, or if there's just a complete like meltdown, explosion or something, I know that not only is the other person a part of it, but I'm a part of it. And what is it there to show me, just as much as, even if, oh, it's their fault and blah, 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 the ego wants to do that. It's like, except, so what is that to show me? Right.
Right.
So when we start shifting our perspective and taking self-responsibility for everything in our reality, we stop projecting onto other people. And when we stop projecting onto other people, and I think we've talked about this in context of relationships and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Is, you know, like when you come to the table and say, I feel this way when this happens.
That changes everything.
Right. And I'm not saying, well, you're an idiot because you're not doing this. I'm just saying, and the context of the conversation you're talking about was, I was talking to you about, I was irritated about something that was just showing up in my reality and just pissing me off. And you said, well, do I contribute to that? And I said, well, yeah, actually you do, but you know, it's my choice. It's how I allow it to happen. And but it was an honest interaction of, no, I take full responsibility. Well, yeah, but I take full responsibility for how it affects me in my reality because I allow it.
Right. Right.
You know?
Well, and you know, you take it further. I was thinking of a conversation I had with my husband, and it's like, instead of saying, you make me feel like X, Y, and Z, that's giving all the control to them, saying that I don't control my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And when you turn it around and say, this behavior in you invokes these feelings in me, so the key here is for me to understand why that behavior triggers this in me.
Right.
And that it makes it look like it, for me, it turns it to where I'm more interested in what it is about that behavior that does this to me, so that I can change myself
Right.
to free me from whatever that is that's holding me in that space.
Right. Right. And when you get
And-
into relationships where you have that interaction, it then automatically becomes two-sided anyway, because then the other person says, well, then what's it for me?
Exactly. And it becomes discovery, individual discovery for each, not a he said, she said kind of.
Right, not a
back
burden,
and forth.
or like a burden too, because, well, we have that whole, how do you, like, going back to our topic on fitting in, is making other people happy, and other people have to be happy
Right.
with me being here as part of this relationship or group or company or whatever, right? So these are all the things that are all, there's so many layers to everything that we talk about, right?
There are. And I mean, everything we talk about seems to all be orbiting around the same thing.
The 7 essences that's on
I
our
know.
Wonderland program,
I
right?
know.
Worthiness. Let me see, I have it right here. Worthiness,
Forgiveness.
trust, guidance, forgiveness and gratitude, self-responsibility, shadow, and self-love, self-nourishment. So those things are, it all boils down to that. And it's all from the self. Right. And when we get to the self, and like, when we did our 2022, what was the thing that with the map that we
The
did?
vision board.
The vision board, right? And we did, I have it here. So I still have it on my desk, the picture, the thing. I mean, the
Right.
self-love is in the center. Right?
Because your vision should be a projection, an external projection of that self-love.
Right. So when we start looking at that, and we get to a place of self-love, we get less in this space of trying to fit into certain parameters that don't necessarily support ourselves, right?
Right.
And if we're in full support of ourselves and full self-love, then we're going to be like, okay, I can be here for this, and I can be here for this. Right. I can connect. At the end of the day, it's funny. If you go back to the fitting in thing, like, how many times do you see in movies, right? And in real life too, when there is a cataclysm, when there is a big, huge event that shuts everything down or puts everybody in a dramatic place, how quickly everybody can start connecting from the heart much differently, because then you're all in the same, then you're all fitting in together because you're all in the same cataclysm, right?
Right.
And that
You
becomes
the commonality has shifted.
right. And so if you think about that, how quickly that can happen. And there are all these conspiracy theories about how, the big governments are going to stage like an alien invasion or something like that, because that would bring the world together and force us into like a one world government, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? That's probably true. Like, I mean, it's probably true that if something like that happened, all of a sudden everybody would be on the same team, because we're all working for common good. Right. We can put our differences aside then. Right.
Right. Which, if you think about world wars, that's essentially what it does.
Right.
Is it pits the world against a common evil.
Right.
Perceived evil.
Right. So if we take away this driving need to fit in, right, then we just start to allowing connection from the heart. But that means doing the self-work and coming to that place of self-love and self-nourishment, self-priority, to say, I can connect with you because where we connect from? We are all divine. We're all part of the wholeness. We all are all different facets embodied as this, like as reflections of the same, whatever you want to call it. You want to call it God, the universe, the field, right? The quantum field,
right?
The wholeness, the multiverse, all that. We're all part of the same thing. So if you want to really dial in, that's where we have our commonality, right? And that doesn't change. So if we all just live from that, then how much easier would everything be to say, well, I honor, that's what namaste is. The divine in me honors the divine in you. Right.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
So, all right.
So where do we go with our
our
clearing
session
for this.
Yeah, our meditation today would be, yeah, how about I allow myself, I allow myself the confidence, and so it's almost like the self-support, and it's like fitting in with yourself, right? And fitting in as part of the whole, right? So allowing all that, and to be able to see that, to see everything. Oh, well, how about this? I can see, I remember how we are all connected. I remember
That's very powerful.
yeah. And I remember how we're all connected, and I remember how to be from that connection. Oh, because we've been talking about the being versus the doing thing, or the doing from being kind of thing. So when we're being from that connection, then all the stuff that we do comes from that being. So that just sort of rolls out and connects to what we've been doing in the recent weeks. So that feels good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Let's do it.
Great. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, make yourself comfortable as we step out of separation back to wholeness and oneness. And we hold ourselves where that is the vibration where we exist, create, and experience. All right. That was a lot of yumminess. All right, I'm not hearing you now. Did you unmute yourself?
Um,
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
No,
okay. I was like, I did. That was,
it was like things had to like, it was like snapping like a whole bunch of stuff into place. My cat thought it was so yummy. He came in here and he like was sitting on my feet, which he never does, and started like purring. And I'm like, oh, wow. Very nice. It was very aligning. It just felt like I said, it felt like there were things that were just sort of snapping into place. And then it was like a breath of like, oh, I don't have to do this. Like, I don't have to pretend this, or I don't have to, like
right.
do all this other stuff. It was nice.
For me, I kept, I've got this vision of things orbiting around me. And it's like, when they talk about everything aligning, on the planets aligning or whatever, it was like all of a sudden, all of that just aligned around me. And it was like, when something, you get everything just right, and like an engine starts or something just comes on alive. That's exactly what I felt.
Yeah, my head got really tingly, and
Yeah.
Oh, very nice. A great start to the week.
I know, it really is. Really is.
Much lighter than last week.
Right. Well, and coming into this, I hate to use the holidays as an excuse, but gratitude and just that looking
Presence with our gratitude is so important.
Right. And this is bringing it all home, bringing it all into the center. Yeah,
because it all does come back to the same stuff.
yes.
So you hear us talk about our courses. So go to Wonderland. That's ONE, not WOND. It's ONE, like one. Wonderland.site is where we have our program. And please comment on your experiences, on your perceptions, on things that have come up for you. Share with those, please share this on social media and with those who you feel could benefit from it. And then come back next week for the next dose.
Yep. And subscribe if this is you're listening podcast. Be sure to subscribe. So because we're here almost every week.
Yep. All right. So everybody have a great week. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni
signing off with this week's Living Ascension. Have a great one, everyone.